Welcome to Live at 9 this Thursday evening, the 4th of February, with me, Doug Harris. Thank you for joining us. And I tell you what, we've got a great, stimulating hour for you, especially if you're into some of the things of world economy, or if you're just into the things of, hey, what can I do in this situation? Got just the guy that is going to help us right the way through with this. I've been sitting here fascinated with a conversation. Don Mcalvany, thank you for coming. All the way from Colorado, isn't it?
It's a long way, isn't it?
It's a long way.
It's good to be with you, Doug.
Great to have you with us. You may have seen Don earlier on this afternoon with Richard Kent on Talk God. Don, he was just talking about one of his newer passions is they have a number of orphanages across the world and looking after some of these poorer kids, and that's part of what he does. But what we're looking at tonight is the whole world economy. Don's been lecturing on this for a number of years now. He understands it. He doesn't always toe the party line, but he certainly knows why he believes what he believes. So great to have you with us, Don. We're going to pack this hour. But let's start a little bit. Tell me a little bit about yourself, about becoming a Christian. That's where I like to begin anyway.
Well, I became a Christian in 1963. We said before the program that was the year you became a Christian. Right, yeah. So great things. That was a great year.
That was a good year.
As Frank Sinatra once sang in a song, that was a very good year. And so I became a Christian in 1963 after I got out of the University of Texas, worked in industrial for the Dow Chemical Company for 5 years, and then in 1968 went to Wall Street. So for the last 42 years, I've worked in the financial world, in almost every area of the financial world that you can imagine. Somewhere along the way, about 34 years ago, I decided I want to start writing about the things I saw. I was a bit disillusioned, very frankly, by a lot of the things I saw on Wall Street. And so I started writing about these in my own newsletter, the Mcalvany Intelligence Advisor. And basically, I guess my claim to fame is I tell people everything they don't want to know. I give them the bad news that nobody else will give them. So I think that makes me very, very unpopular in most quarters. And if you ask me to leave now, I understand.
No, that's right. But what we did agree with is at least the last 10 minutes, after depressing everybody, we are going to give them some hope and light at the end of the tunnel, aren't we?
Is there any hope? Of course there is. Of course there's hope. First of all, there's Jesus, but there's other things we could talk about right. Too. So there is.
Yeah. Give us a snapshot. I mean, you've been obviously looking at the world economy for all these years, understanding it, investigating it. Can you give us something of a sort of a snapshot of the world economy, of where we are and what's happening at this present time?
Doug, I think one way to understand the world economy is to look at the life of a drug addict. A drug addict starts off innocently enough, smoking grass, marijuana, whatever you call it in this part of the world. And then he goes to heavier stuff, and before you know it, he becomes addicted, and then he's taking more and more and more, and before you know it, he's hooked. And then and the doses have to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger just to get the same buzz he had before. And so there's a principle of diminishing returns at work with the poor drug addict. This is what's happened in the Western economies. We adopted an economic model in the 1930s that was given to us by Lord John Maynard Keynes. I believe he was an Englishman.
Yeah, blame us. Come on.
He was a bit of a socialist, and basically the plan was, and it's now been adopted by every central bank and government in the world almost, is that no matter how bad things looked like they were going to get, you could print enough money, eliminate all business cycles, and you could just print your way or run up enough debt to stay in a prosperous situation forever. But, it became just like that drug. We began to take more and more of that drug, and so we've seen governments around the world, unfortunately led by our own, who have run the printing presses faster and faster, who have run up debt that is at the most unbelievable levels in all of world history, and it's become addictive. But just like with the drug addict can keep taking larger and larger doses. He has to, in order to stay at the same level. There's this principle of diminishing returns at work, and so he has to keep taking larger and larger doses, and he gets less and less bang for his buck, if you will, or a pound. And so he has to take larger and larger doses, and before you know it, at some point he will OD, he will roll over, and he will die. And that's where the economies of the Western world are today. We have run up the most humongous debt pyramid in the history of the world. If you take total debts in the United States today, federal government debt, private debt, corporate debt, debt that's owed to all of our pensioners and so forth, we're looking at around $87 trillion in debt. It'll never be paid off. And the debt pyramid keeps getting bigger and bigger. And the more things begin to implode, the faster they keep running the printing presses. Now, unfortunately, we've set a bad example. And governments all over the world are now doing the same thing. So we have moved into a financial crisis which started in September of 2007, but which was incredibly predictable. All you had to do is say, this is what they're doing, and there will be these consequences. And so that's exactly what's happened. For years, we saw the Federal Reserve, our central bank, running its printing presses and running up debt and encouraging the American people and corporations and business to go into more and more and more and more debt because we can have perpetual prosperity. That's what your English friend John Maynard Keynes taught us. It's not true, by the way. Well,
it doesn't work. Look, I know every time you take a breath, I'm going to get in there, Don. But I love guests like you because I just have to ask questions and sit back and let you answer. But just to say, folks, let's open the text and the email right now. 07781 472647 is the text number, live@talkgod.com. If as we go through tonight there are things that you want to, we'll be looking hopefully at some very practical issues as well as maybe looking at global biblical things as well. And if you want to talk about this whole world economy, what's happening, where it's going to lead us to, how it affects us as Christians, you've got some specific questions, do come through to us. We'll get as many in as we can as we're talking with Don tonight. So do come on through with that. I mean, basically, Don, the very picture that you were painting there, it becomes obvious that at some point you just can't go on any further. In other words, you're running up the debt, printing more money, running up the debt, printing more money. At what point is this just going to explode and implode and that be the end of it?
The drug addict system finally begins to fail. He begins to OD, and one day he rolls over and he dies. Our system, our financial system, is beginning to fail. We have run up so much debt in the last 20 to 30 years in the United States, but it's happening all over the world. It's happening in Europe. It's happening in the UK. And at some point, the system simply can't carry that much additional debt. Something will begin to be the last straw that breaks the camel's back. In this instance, it was the creation by Wall Street, which I've worked on Wall Street for 42 years, and I can say that it is run by pure, unadulterated greed. And so they saw a way to make hundreds of billions of dollars in profit by creating trillions of dollars of credit default derivatives, which they did over about a 10 or 15-year period. These are highly leveraged financial creations like the Frankenstein monster, where we take pieces from everywhere, put it together, and wow, we've got a new deal. Okay, and they created trillions of dollars of these derivatives. Now over 600 trillion. By the way, they doubled in the last 12 months in spite of the financial crisis. And then they exported these financial derivatives, these credit default derivatives, to every financial institution in the world. Central banks and insurance companies and pension funds all over the world bought into these things. And so we saw this whole thing begin to melt down in September of 2007. And that was the beginning of the Second Great Depression. And let me say, very frankly, I believe that we are in a depression, at least in America, but I believe it is spreading, of the Second Great Depression. And let me say, very frankly, I believe that we are in a depression, at least in America, but I believe it is spreading globally. Mm-hmm. You know what they say, we sneeze, the rest of the world catches a cold. I hate to say it, but there's some truth to that.
Yeah.
And
So, can I say, you mentioned the word depression there. We've all been talking about recession, and we've all been told that we're just coming out of recession. Some say we never went in it, but those that are honest, they said we come out. What's the difference between a depression and a recession, and do you think we're in a depression rather than a recession?
Well, for starters, recession is a politically correct term, and depression is a politically incorrect term. You have to understand, our government, our Fed, Wall Street, the Treasury, nobody will acknowledge that we're in a depression. A recession is a short-term period of business contraction, liquidation, bankruptcies, and so forth. A depression is simply one of much, much greater magnitude. And a real depression, from the peak to the trough, there will be about a total of a 10% decline in the total GDP. Well, we believe that this is, in fact, a depression. Now, first of all, definition of terms. Inflation is just an expansion of the monetary base. It's the politicians running the printing presses. And as they expand currency and credit, they're diluting the money supply. It waters down the money supply, pushes prices up. That's where inflation. Inflation is always caused by governments. It's caused by governments and central banks running the printing presses too fast. Deflation is a contraction of the money supply. It's a complete contraction of currency and credit, but that's not what we've got right now. Our Federal Reserve in the last 12 months has increased the monetary base in the United States by 129%. This is huge. Yeah. This is huge. So that's inflation, deflation. Okay, we had a deflationary depression during the Great Depression, but our central bank, the Fed, came along and they said, well, never again. We won't let that happen again. Next time we get into something that looks like that, we'll just run the printing presses faster and faster. In fact, the head of our central bank, Ben Bernanke, he's famous for saying, hey, we have a secret weapon. It's called the printing press. We'll just unleash it on the world when we need to. And so they said, we will print our way out of every recession that comes. So since the war, everything has been inflationary recessions. Now, this one is deeper than anything we've seen since the Great Depression, and I think you can very clearly say this is a depression we are in the United States and in many, maybe not all, but many parts of the world. Asia, I think, is faring a little better than the West. Okay? But at some point, this may actually turn into a roaring deflationary depression that they're about to lose control of, and then as they run the printing presses faster and faster and faster, all of a sudden, people begin to say, wow, we've just seen the United States government and Fed commit $13 trillion to trying to bail out the U.S. economy since September of 2007. That's a good number, $13 trillion. Wow. We hold trillions of dollars. Ooh, we don't think we want to hold those anymore, and so people start getting out of their dollars, and they try to unload their dollars, and then the Americans say, oh, wow, I don't think I want to stay in dollars either. And overnight, you can have a deflationary depression morph into an inflationary depression and then a hyperinflation. Right. I believe that there's the potential, because of the massive expansion of U.S. dollars. The U.S. dollar is the world's reserve currency. Okay, never in history have you seen the world's reserve currency inflated to the extent that ours is. So at some point, what is a depression today, and some people would argue a deflationary depression, I would argue it's really an inflationary depression at this point. It could morph into a superinflation or a hyperinflation, and that would be catastrophic because everybody all over the world holds $13 trillion in U.S. dollar obligations. So, I mean, basically, the American government still, I mean, people say America's losing its influence in that, but really, the economy is so big and so vast, and the dollar is still looked upon, so, you know, by many. What happens there is going to affect the rest of the world, isn't it? It's like this domino effect. Have any of the policies of President Obama or anything like that, has that sought in any way to bring this under control, or is he, you know, developing it even more? It's getting worse. I don't think there's a lot of difference between the Republicans and the Democrats, and frankly, I think there's kind of this unity between Wall Street, our Treasury, and the Fed. I call them triplets or Siamese triplets who are joined at the hip. And no, we are still printing money like there was no tomorrow since President Obama came in. President Obama was clearly favored by Wall Street. They supported him 7-1 in financial contributions over Mr. McCain, Senator McCain, who is a Republican. So, no, unfortunately, what we're seeing is talk of higher taxes. It's suicidal to raise taxes in the middle of a recession or a depression. I know that your government just did,
yes.
But what can I say? That's your problem. But we're facing the same problem in our country too.
Yeah.
They're talking about raising taxes. They're spending more and more money. They're talking about humongous government programs. They're talking about a national health care program that'll cost $2.5 trillion for starters. So it's some people in America believe that the inmates really have taken over the asylum, and it's a problem. Nothing that is being done is going to halt the recession. Everything that is being done by our government today is actually poison to the U.S. economy. And unfortunately, if it's poison to the U.S. economy, then it begins to spread all over the world.
Interesting. I mean, just a question here because it's come in. Hi, Doug. Your guest keeps referring to the Federal Reserve as our Fed. I understood that it's actually a privately owned entity. Can you ask him about this?
I wish I were a shareholder in the Fed so I could truly say his point is well taken. It is a privately held institution. It's a central bank. It was set up supposedly into law, although it was never really legally ratified in 1913, and it became the engine for inflation in the United States. And if we had one of my PowerPoint presentations here, I could show you the chart of how we had 200 years of flat inflation, and when the Fed came in, the inflation started going like this, and it's absolutely never stopped. So it is a private bank that is very much staffed by people from Wall Street. And so the Fed, as I said, there is this incestuous relationship between the Fed, the U.S. Treasury, and Wall Street. And it's just kind of like a revolving door. And these people, what they do are for their interests. Point in case, we had a $720 billion and a $778 billion in bailout programs,
yes.
stimulus programs, and so forth. The majority of those funds for the bailout went to 2% of the large financial institutions in America, which are on Wall Street, the Goldman Sachs and the Morgan Stanleys and the J.P. Morgan Chase and so forth, went to a tiny little sliver of these people who have all this tremendous influence on Wall Street. The other 98% of the banks and the people across the economy, they got absolutely nothing. There is a massive uproar in the United States today because they realize that so much of that money went into the corporate coffers and went into huge bonuses for these people, and we're making $1 million bonuses off of taxpayer money.
Yeah.
Actually, they didn't tax us for it; they just printed the money. It's just a big mess.
I mean, we have the same anger here, of course, because probably not in quite the same large figures as that. But again, we had the bank bailout, and again, those people that are giving themselves big bonuses, and the government seems unable to really be able to do this. I mean, you used the word earlier on greed. It seems to me that if at the heart of our economies the people are greedy, is there any hope? I mean, okay, we're talking about the biblical side of God stepping in and possibly doing something in a bit. But from the human point of view, if these people are so tied up with this and so determined to have this for themselves, is there any hope that we can get out of where we are at the moment?
I don't think it's the people that's greedy, but it certainly is our financial and our political leaders. And as I said before, it's kind of an incestuous relationship between them. I don't believe there's hope until the system breaks down. Lenin used to say, not one of my heroes, but a bright guy, he used to say worse is better. And I think as the financial system actually gets worse, and the system and the whole machinery begins to break down, I think at that point we may have a chance for things to get better, but I truly believe things are going to get worse before they get better. And let me add this thought, Doug, because some of our listeners are probably saying tonight, is this guy crazy? Is he daft? But I truly believe things are going to get worse before they get better. And let me add this thought, Doug, because some of our listeners are probably saying tonight, is this guy crazy? Is he daft? We keep hearing from the financial media in America, and we watch CNN and CNBC, and we listen to the Treasury, and we listen to the Fed, and they tell us everything is wonderful. There's a recovery.
Yeah.
And this guy's daft. He's saying just exactly the opposite. And yes, I would say, yes, we are saying exactly the opposite, because the people who are saying that are the ones that told us there would be no recession. They said there was no dot-com bubble, and then it burst in March of 2000, and $8 trillion went down the tubes. And then they pumped trillions of dollars more into the system to make another bubble to try to push back the recession or the depression, and that was the real estate bubble. And they said, not to worry, there is no real estate bubble. Boom, the real estate bubble collapsed. They pushed trillions of dollars more into the system, this time to try to get us another stock market bubble, and they say there's no recession. Everything is fine. Oh yeah, there was a little recession, but the recovery is right around the corner. These guys are either terminally stupid or they're not telling us the truth. And the sad thing is, most Americans, like most people around the world, are relying on their media, their financial media, which in America is wholly owned by Wall Street, so it's not objective. They're relying on their official pronouncements from the government, and so people are not getting good information. People think they're getting good information, and they're getting bum information. Before the program, I was talking to some people downstairs. I think you were one of them. Yeah. And I said, look, you want to understand how misinformed Americans are. In the last 10 years, the S&P composite, that's a big composite of stocks, a stock average, it dropped 23% in the United States. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, everybody knows what that is, that dropped 8.25% in 10 years. The NASDAQ dropped 44% in 10 years. Okay, these are big drops. Now, if you factor in inflation, it was much worse. Yeah. Okay, really, that was kind of painful. Gold went up, by the way, during that same time, over 400%. Now, 99% of the American people were in and stayed in the stock market because Wall Street and the media kept telling them, it's a great place to be. Just hang in there with us. It's going to be great. It's going to be wonderful. And they're losing more and more, and they're oh, no, it's going to get better. It's going to get better. And less than 1% of the American people bought gold because Wall Street, oh, no, it's a bad deal. Only idiots would buy gold as it was going up 400%. So the problem we have, and I hope it's not as true in England or in the UK, but in America and many parts of the world, people are not getting good information. They need to find good, hardcore sources of information, and it's usually not going to come from official establishment-type sources. So I would really say to anyone who is a listener today who is wondering, why is this daft guy telling us the opposite of what the mainline media is telling us, you need to find some maverick sources of information to help you kind of join the dots.
I think we should say here, your credentials, I think, speak for themselves, and people can accept or reject, but at least test out what you're saying. Now, you've got your own website, www.mcalvany.com. And we can give you that information. It'll be on the screen. But also ring the office. We will give you that information in the office as well. But you also said you would be happy to email out a couple of newsletters that you've put out recently. So if anybody want that, if folks email in and ask for that, we will be able to pass that on to them.
Yeah, I just did a two-part series on my January and February newsletters called Out of Control, the U.S. Financial System in Meltdown. And as a matter of fact, we spoke last week to a group of top businessmen down in Mexico City, and I gave them this material, and I'm sure that they will hate me the rest of their lives after they read it. But it really does go into a lot of detail as to what's happening, the mechanics of the breakdown in the system, and then more importantly, what do you do to get out of harm's way? And maybe before the program's over, we can talk, how do you get out of harm's way? How do you protect yourself? Yeah. So I would love to share that information with anybody that wants to get it. And so we'll manage to get it to them through you and through the emails and so forth.
Just email in, folks, and ask for that financial newsletter, and I'll make sure that you get hold of it. Because it is important that we have the right information, or at least we listen to both sides. message. As you say, people can accept or reject. They can call you a maverick if they want to, or they can look at your track record. But it does seem that the governments have their own agenda. They have what they want to do, what they feel is best for them. And maybe what is best for them isn't always what is best for the people.
Politicians and governments want to protect their own interests. They want to protect their own power position. And if you're a politician in America, you just want to keep getting reelected. So you give as much away to the people as you can. You tell them what they want to hear. Excuse me. You tell them good things. You tell them the economy is recovering. And by the way, go out and buy some more and borrow some more and buy and borrow and buy and borrow. That's how we got in trouble in the first place.
Yeah.
And so they try to kind of talk it up and psych people up and so forth. And our mission, if I've had a mission for the last 42 years, it's been to help people understand the times. To help people understand what they're not going to get from most normal type sources. And I think this is the problem with most people in my country, maybe at least some in your country, is we don't understand the times. We don't really understand what's going on behind the scenes. We're not getting the right information from all of our official sources. And I think this is especially important for God's people.
Yes.
Doug, I will tell you that in the last couple of years, we have seen millions of American Christians go bankrupt. They've lost most of their 401ks and their retirement portfolios because they haven't understood the times and because they've believed the wrong voices. They believe false voices, and they're going broke. And yet these are Christians. These are God's people, and I would have hoped they would have had more discernment, but unfortunately they're limited to the same official sources that everybody else is. So I think it's really important that we help people understand the times, and that's what you're doing with your program every week. Give me a break. You're trying to help people understand how the world is really functioning in relation to God's whole spiritual kingdom in the Bible.
Right. Just on that, it's just interesting that you're talking about people needing to know, and just share this is from Doug, not me. Obviously, he's written to me, Doug, and it's from Doug. I want to share with you our experience in 2007 when the Lord spoke to both Sally and I a number of times about leaving where we were living and going in faith to somewhere we had for us. We had moved in 2000 from the countryside into a town, clearing our mortgage and buying for $135K. In 2004, our youngest son was getting married to a girl with 2 boys. They needed help with buying, so we mortgaged and lent them $40K. As time went on, we found it more difficult to pay the mortgage, but had thought we should move in 2009 when the loan came up for renewal. That was when the Lord stepped in. He knew the credit crunch was coming, and not wanting to move into a flat, we are in our late 70s, we found a park mobile home where he could live with our modest income but clear the mortgage. Not wanting to bore you, Doug? You're not boring me. But to give an example of how the Lord leads if we are obedient. And I think that just really underlines what you were saying. Here were people that were listening to what God was saying to them. I think sometimes we get so tied up, maybe even on a personal level, with what I want, what I would like. Therefore, I go out and take another loan. I go out and do more here and more there. Whereas we're not listening when God is speaking clearly to us. Do you think this is a problem that Christians can get so tied up with the world system that they miss this out?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's why we have as many Christians going broke in America, percentage-wise, as non-Christians. As a matter of fact, we have as many Christians getting divorced in America as non-Christians. So clearly we're listening to the wrong voices. I think that we need to be asking God and seeking His wisdom on our financial affairs. We need to be seeking His wisdom on our financial affairs. Now, He's given us some insights in Scripture. Scripture actually talks about debt and how destructive debt is. And oh, no, man. I mean, we've all gone out and leveraged ourselves to the eyeballs. After all, isn't this the way we in the UK and in America have made all our money through leverage and so forth, and now it's killing everybody. We actually violated some biblical principles that are found in Scripture. But we need to understand the times, and that's where programs like yours and newsletters like mine and programs like ours can help people. But we've got to seek the Lord. The Lord will guide us. He can give us direction. And I talk to people every week who have had direction, and God has told them, you're going in a bad direction. You're about to walk into a minefield. You're in a minefield. Back out.
Yeah.
And so forth. And so I think we need to all begin to listen, because I don't believe this is the end of the financial problems. I believe in a minefield, back out, and so forth. And so I think we need to all begin to listen, because I don't believe this is the end of the financial problems. I believe that we are still, this is going to sound very negative, I think we're still in the early stages of a financial crisis that could go on for the next 5 to 10 years or more.
That's interesting, because, and it leads on to one of the things, and of course, one of the next emails that we've got here. But of course, you saying that, one then has to say, well, what's going to happen at the end of that 5 or 10 years? Are we ever going to get out of it? Is this something that has to do with the whole biblical perspective? I mean, is the economy and the problems that we're facing? And Chrissy writes in, she says, hi, Doug and Don, bless you. Do you think a one-world monetary system will eventually come into being? Very simple question, probably not such a simple answer.
Maybe more simple than we think. I think one of your leading politicians has actually talked about a one-world currency and why that would be a wise thing. And you hear people all over Europe and America now talking about a one-world currency as the solution to this financial crisis. As the financial crisis actually worsens over the next 2 or 3 or 4 years, I think you're going to hear more talk of world currency, of world government, and so forth. We have leading politicians, people on Wall Street, in our Treasury, in our Fed, and so forth, that are strong advocates of a world government. Okay? And they're actually quite vocal about it. David Rockefeller, one of the stronger advocates of world government in America, he spoke in front of the United Nations in 1993, and he said the world is moving towards world government. He said all we need is the right major crisis, and the peoples of the world will accept the new world order. The right major crisis.
And he actually said that.
He actually said that
on record,
in the United Nations. I've quoted that many times in my newsletter. And, you know, what is the right world crisis? Well, maybe it started in September of 2007 with the meltdown of the credit default derivative bubble, this multi-hundreds of trillions of dollars derivative bubble that started in the United States, moved worldwide, and maybe this thing accelerates over the next 2 or 3 or 4 years. I believe in my heart of hearts that it will. And then the cries will be more for world government, more for world currency, and so forth. We must concentrate power. The old national formula for national governments and currencies, that doesn't work anymore. Well, that's not true, but I think that's what they're going to say. And so as I analyze the world financial monetary meltdown, breakdown, if you will, Doug, and also a lot of political things that are happening around the world, to me, it sounds like we are moving not only towards world government, but very possibly, and I say possibly because I'm not dogmatic about this, towards the rising kingdom of the Antichrist. I wonder if this world government, if that may not be what it is all about.
It's interesting. I mean, obviously I don't have a fraction of the knowledge you have about the monetary system. But one of the things as I've looked biblically that I've always thought, one of the things that would really bring about that potential one world government, and maybe the only thing that could really bring it, will be a financial crisis. Because any other thing is contained. But once you get it seems to be you've got all these dominoes stacked up, and only one big thing's got to go, and the domino effect goes literally right around the world.
Well, what are some common denominators in the world's financial sickness now? The credit default derivatives that were created on Wall Street with the blessing, I might say, of our government, our Fed, our politicians. They saw what was going on. They didn't care because everybody was making their billions of dollars in profits. But those credit default derivatives were spread all over the world into every nook and cranny of the financial world. It was like an AIDS virus that suddenly just went everywhere. Okay, that's one of the common denominators we have. The other is you've got $13 trillion in dollar-denominated assets that are in every nook and cranny around the world. And so we've seen the meltdown in the credit default derivatives bubble, and we're seeing, I believe, the early stages of a meltdown in the U.S. dollar. By the way, it's dropped 70% in value since 1980. It's dropped about 33% in value since 2001. I would call that a meltdown of the U.S. dollar.
Yes.
But we believe that meltdown is going to accelerate. Now, when that meltdown accelerates, it's not just a problem, a huge headache for America. It's a headache for the whole world because everybody owns those dollars.
Yes.
Is that what could trigger this global crisis? Is that plus the credit default derivatives, is that what could do it? And then we have these illustrious leaders in Brussels and Washington and New York at the UN standing up and saying the only answer to this global crisis, remember that's what Rockefeller said, the right global crisis, and people will accept the New World Order, will be a world government. So I think we're moving in that direction very, very rapidly, and I think Christians need to understand the times. They need to be able to see the political side of what's going on, the financial, monetary, economic side of what's going on, and the spiritual side of what's going on, and tie them together. Yes. That is what we try to do in our newsletters and the things we talk about.
Are you suggesting, Mark asks, are you suggesting there is going to be a financial collapse, and where is it likely to happen first, USA or the UK?
That's a good question. Not being an expert on the UK, I do rely on a few of my friends in the UK who would argue that the situation, at least on a percentage or a per capita basis, financially is worse in the UK. I understand a lot more about the American situation, and it looks to me like it is terminally ill, that there's huge problems. And by the way, this whole thing about recovery, we're in a great recovery. That recovery is so totally bogus. There never was a recovery. They just kept talking about the recovery. Yes. And it's like you're laying on the floor, and you're feeling bad, and you're turning green, Doug, and the flies are collecting. And I tell you, Doug, you've never looked better. Get out, Doug. Let's do it. Let's go down. Let's make it happen, Doug. Yeah. And that's what they're hoping, that this will bring back the U.S. economy. Right. We'll all start going out and buying and borrowing again and so forth. I think the United States has been the biggest offender in the world monetary system. Not the only offenders, but the biggest. And I believe that the global financial crisis will start in the U.S. and with the U.S. dollar, because the U.S. dollar is the world's reserve currency. Already, major powers are beginning to move out of the dollar. China, Russia, the Middle East, Brazil, as fast as they can.
Yes. And, of course, once that happens, then, yes, it will spread to UK, it will spread to other parts of the world fairly quickly. Patricia says, this might sound like a silly question, but does your guest know why all these different firms are offering to buy everybody's old gold? Every time you turn the TV on, there's someone advertising to buy gold.
Yes, because they're ripping them off and assume the public is so stupid that they don't know that gold is going up and is going to go up a lot higher. Don't sell your old gold. You should be buying more gold. Yeah. Gold has just gone from $253 in the last in 2001. It bottomed in 1999 at $253. It double bottomed in 2001, 2 years later, at $255. It's since been up to $1,229. I'm talking dollars.
Yes.
Wish it was pounds, but I'm talking
dollars a do.
I'm talking dollars. And now it's back down around 1,100 and so forth. Gold is going to go a lot higher. People we know who we have great respect for, who do understand the monetary system, including a friend of mine, Ron Paul, who is a very well-known and respected congressman in the United States, believe that you will see gold at several $1,000s an ounce.
Really?
Because of the financial crisis, and because this financial crisis is going to accelerate. Now, the people who are advertising on television, we'll buy your gold cheap, we'll give you a great deal. It won't be a great deal, but this is a big mistake to sell your gold. You want to be hanging on to your gold. I believe it will go up much, much further. And, in fact, we're counseling our people, look, gold is one of the few stable things in an unstable world. Gold and silver. Silver's done well as well. Why are the central banks in Europe accumulating so many gold? Not Europe, in Asia, in China, in India, accumulating so much gold. The Central Bank of India just bought 200 tons of IMF gold. Let me tell you what's happening with gold. This is important to understand. Gold is moving from weak hands to strong hands. Gold is moving from the west to the east.
Right.
Now, this is an important point, and I hope our listeners will get this. There are epochs in history where certain regions and certain countries are dominant. And England, blessed old England, England ruled the world in the 1800s. Yeah. And they did a great job. And I'm not one of those against the British colonial empire. I've been all over Africa. I've seen the results, and I've seen the good stuff that came. But you know what? Then the baton passed on.
Yeah.
And in the 1900s, the baton passed on to America. And America became the dominant world power. And we were the dominant world power pretty much up towards the latter part of the century. Now the baton passed on to America. And America became the dominant world power. And we were the dominant world power pretty much up towards the latter part of the century. Now the baton is passing again, and the baton is passing to Asia in general and China in particular. Now, these things happen every 100 years or so. I think that God has a hand in these. I don't think they happen by accident. But as you see these epic shifts of power, and the world balance of power is now shifting to Asia and to China. Whether we like it in Europe and England or America or not, it's happening. And one of the things you see happening that accompanies that kind of a power shift is you begin to see the gold in the old region moving to the new region. And so the gold, it's like the gold precedes the economic, financial, and by the way, military power.
Yes.
And so this is what's happening, the gold of the West. What happened, by the way, when you're present Prime Minister, who was Chancellor of the Exchequer, sold a great amount of the UK's gold in the 250s back in 2001. 250s, that was before it went to 1,226. The market timing seemed to be a little off there. But where did that gold go? I would wager that a great deal of that gold went into the hands of the central banks in China or over in Asia. And that's what's happening. The IMF gold that's being sold. When somebody gets in trouble, Dubai got in trouble here a month or so ago. They're having to sell some gold.
That's right.
China, the Asians will end up getting it. So there's a huge shift in power that's taking place, but some of the biggest people in the world are buying gold because they see the ultimate demise of the U.S. dollar. They see the coming meltdown of the financial system. So ignore the ads on television. This is not the time to be selling your jewelry. If you're going to do anything, buy some more, but for God's sakes, don't sell it.
Right, okay.
If you want to give it away, I mean, you can always get hold of me, but don't do that either.
Hi all, this is Mike. The value of money is merely a figment of the trust that people place in currencies. Most debt takes the form of book entries. I can see that the man of sin writing off the world debt and starting afresh from scratch in order to ingratiate himself into acceptance of the world's population. Good America's Germany, whose currency flatlined in the past. After all, the Bible speaks of a year of jubilee when all the debt is written off and the assets returned to the debtors. What do you think?
I think he might be right. I think he's a very, very smart guy. Why don't you have him on this program? No, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Right. Okay. How will China play a part in the global financial meltdown? We've already started answering some of that. Will they and Russia begin to trade oil in different currencies and thus create a bigger, it's one of these, problem for countries in huge debt like UK and USA?
Okay. Here's one thing I believe very strongly. There is a new axis that is forming in the world. We had the old axis. We know what that looked like during World War II. Italy, Germany, Japan, and so forth. There's a new axis, and that is China, that is Russia, and that is the radical Islamic states. They have a few things in common. They hate the West, but in particular, they hate America. I think they really hate the UK. I think they hate Israel. Mm-hmm. Okay, and that is the new alliance that is coming into being. Now, it's an anti-dollar alliance. It's an anti-West alliance. And there is tremendous power in that alliance. The Middle Eastern states hold a lot of oil, so they have a lot of power and wealth there. Russia is the world's largest oil producer, and so they have a lot of things in common, and they're working together. And yes, they're anti-dollar and they're anti-West, and they will cooperate with us where necessary. You look at Russia, you look at the Middle East, and they're also very, very natural resources rich. They have tremendous natural resources wealth, and that's going to amass to their power. I believe the most likely thing is that we will see, whether we see a new world currency that maybe is a basket of 4 or 5 currencies, maybe it'll include the dollar for a while, maybe even some gold, or whether we move to a whole new reserve currency, which I think within 7 to 10 years could become the Chinese currency, because they're accumulating gold right now as fast as they can in order to have a gold-backed currency. I think you will probably see ultimately a Chinese currency that will be a new world reserve currency. As all of this is happening, America's America's position as the lone superpower in the world is going to very, very rapidly diminish. And already we've exported our manufacturing base. We're no longer a manufacturing nation. When we get into World War III with Russia and China in the next 5 to 10 to probably 10 to 15 years, who is going to build our armaments? I guess China's going to have to, because we've exported all our factories over there. Mm-hmm. So there's huge changes that are taking place in the world, and you can't separate the financial. Yes, oil is a weapon. They're going to redenominate right now, and for the last, I guess, since Bretton Woods, oil transactions have been denominated in U.S. dollars. That's about to cease. You now have a new currency emerging in the Middle East called the Gulfo. I guess like the euro, like the Amero, which is an American currency, a North American currency that's being proposed. And so the whole world wants to move away from dollars in oil transactions and so forth. And so there's just gigantic shifts that are taking place in the world. And unfortunately, my country, America, is going to emerge from this whole period much, much weaker and no longer the world superpower. I don't think Europe is going to do so well either, but I think Asia is going to emerge stronger and stronger. And then out of this, who knows? Maybe we'll see the kingdom of the Antichrist.
We've had a number of emails asking for Don's newsletter. I'll make sure that gets off to you in the next few days. Donna, send it to me and I will pass it on to you. Let's begin to get down. We've got other emails, but we've got one or two on some personal issues, and then I think we want to start talking about how we can do it both spiritually and be prepared for this. But this is from Jan. She says that this program is very timely from our point of view. Our son rang earlier this evening seeking our counsel rebuying a house in Madrid where he lives and works. The mortgage will be for 40 years and is for 340,000 euros, which he can afford on his present salary. Can you ask your guest, is it a good time to go ahead with this? He has been renting for the last 3 years.
No, I don't believe it's a good time to go ahead with it. There has been a gigantic global real estate bubble. We've had our own gigantic real estate bubble, which burst starting a couple of years ago. Now it's spread from the residential mortgages to the commercial real estate. Commercial real estate in many areas of the United States is down almost 50% now. But it is global in nature. And I don't believe this is a good time to be going into real estate until you know for certain that the global recession or depression is over, and we do not believe that it is. Right. So I think he would be very premature in going into real estate. I think the best position most of us could be in right now is if we had sold our house 2 or 3 years ago when we were close to the top, and we're renting today. And if I were in that position, I would probably continue to rent for the next 2 or 3 years. It's a time to be low in debt, to hang on to your cash, or maybe put it in gold or silver or something that's going to endure. But I don't believe it's a time to be going heavy into real estate or the stock market.
Okay. Interesting. This is John and Bruce said this. Didn't the death of hundreds of Wall Street brightest and finest in 9/11 bring into power a new generation of experts who are not quite clever enough? Can we have a yes or no answer on that? Would you agree or disagree with that?
99.9% of Wall Street survived that horrible tragedy. And Wall Street has been very greedy and self-serving going way back before 9/11, and they continue to be today. They're very short-sighted. We must remember Wall Street is in business to sell stocks and bonds, to underwrite things, and create new paper products that they can sell to the public, to institutions, and to the world in order to make billions of dollars of profits for themselves. I started in Wall Street in 1968. I began within 5 years to realize that it was very, very corrupt in many, many ways.
And it hasn't changed.
And I don't really believe that it's changed. So it didn't just start with 9/11. It continues right up through today. And I just wish the American people would see through it, because the American people and the middle class of America is seeing its wealth destroyed. And this is too bad, but they're trusting the wrong people. And this is so important in life, Doug. We've got to find people who get it right, who have the right answers. If we're going to trust anybody, the best thing to do is trust God.
That's right.
But we've got to get it right. And when you trust false message and false information from people, you're going to get it wrong.
Let's start bringing it down, because we painted a gloom and doom picture. The economy's going to go in, and world governments are going to come in, and Antichrist is going to rise. And we got people out there quaking in their shoes. We got others saying, I'm going to trust you, God, whatever happens. Maybe just we can go in off of this and then on to some very practical things, both practically and spiritually, that people could do to prepare. Jenny asks, thank you for the very informative program. If one has spare cash, would you suggest I buy gold shares rather than invest it in the bank?
Let me answer that question with a preface.
Yeah.
And that is, I believe that God warns his people in advance of coming problems or even judgment and helps them to get prepared. Yeah. There were 8 people that got on a boat because he told them that they better get ready. First time ever, but there was going to be a flood. Yeah. There was 7 years of plenty, but Joseph said, hey, the bad times are coming. We got to get ready. They prepared, and many people lived and survived because they prepared. And so I always hear from Christians who say, oh, if you just trusted God, just trust God. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to get prepared. I think the concept of understanding the times and preparing for difficult times is a very biblical concept. So Joseph is one of my heroes in the Bible. Okay, now, as far as gold stocks versus gold, I personally prefer the metal itself. I'll be very honest, I own gold stocks. I own silver stocks. And they have their ups and downs and so forth. The problem I have with the gold and silver stocks is they will drop with the stock market. I think the U.S. stock market is massively overpriced at 26 times earnings, and is being propped up because it's being manipulated by Wall Street, the Fed, and the U.S. Treasury through the plunge protection team. They pump billions of dollars into the stock market to hold it up. We don't think, because of what we see coming in the economy, which is a massive drop in the economy. Unemployment in America is screaming. By the way, the government says 10% unemployment. Real world numbers are over 20%. And I can prove that. All I have to do is go back and use the old ways they always calculated in the past. I think the stock market will fall, and because of that, and other markets around the world will fall, and that will take down the gold stocks. I think because of the nature and the magnitude of the crisis that's coming, that it makes more sense to hold the physical metal, physical gold or silver, in your own possession, in a safety deposit box or someplace that is very safe and secure.
So really, that's what you're saying. You're saying buy the metal rather than the shares. If you've got money, if you need to invest it, that's what you're saying to do at this present time.
The metals have outperformed the shares over the last 9 years. The shares are tied to the financial markets, and if there is a meltdown on Wall Street or in the financial markets, the shares will melt down. I believe I understand that. I used to market gold shares with the largest gold stock money manager in the world in the 1970s. I marketed something like $400 million worth of gold shares. I understand gold shares. They're very different now than they were back in the 1970s. There's much more complexity about it, and I think gold shares are much, much more risky. There will be times when they will move faster and further. So you will have bigger percentage gains here and there along the way, but I take a pretty dim view of where things could go, and I think physical metal in your own possession is the best hedge against political turmoil, financial turmoil, economic turmoil, and so on.
Let's come down to spiritually preparing for the times, okay? We're facing this crisis. You believe it's going to come. You believe it's somewhere near, but we're not putting any dates on it, so let's be very clear about that. But how do I spiritually be prepared to face such a time that we're in? You talked about understanding the times. That's very much the sons of Issachar in the Old Testament. How do we understand the times, and how are we to be prepared, Don, for what we're about to face?
Well, 2 verses that I believe the Lord really emphasized for me in the last few years, Doug, were Matthew 6:33. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. And I think he gave me that verse. I knew the verse, but he reminded me of the verse at a time when I was way too busy in business and a whole lot of other things, and was kind of putting him, down the line somewhere. I think we've got to keep the Lord first in our lives. I think and he gave me another verse too, which was be still and know that I am God. Unfortunately, I move so fast all the time that sometimes I can't hear him. Right, and so both of those verses were a message to me that, look, you got to slow down and you got to listen to God and you got to keep him first. When you keep him first and you're spending time with the Lord every day and you're seeking his wisdom, does the Lord care about your financial matters? Yes, he does. Does he care about everything in your life? Yes, he does. Does he care first and foremost about your salvation? You're going to live in eternity with him because of Jesus. Yes, he does. But he cares about the other things. He cares about our children. He cares about our jobs. He cares about our safety, and he cares about our finances. Why aren't we seeking him? Why aren't we seeking him? And I believe if we were seeking him every day, that he would give us wisdom and guidance. And I'm too stupid to walk through this minefield without having his guidance every day. And I think, unfortunately, most of us are at least challenged because we don't have a lot of information to go on. But, you know, God can lead us step by step by step, and I believe that's the first and foremost thing in financial planning. Now, he's given us some guidelines. He's told us avoid debt. Come on, we're all drowning in debt. In at least America, maybe you're not over here, but we are. We're drowning in debt, and so we should be reducing our debts.
How do we do that, Don? Somebody listening to you saying, I know I've got debt. I know that's a problem. How do I start dealing with it, though?
Number one, you stop taking on new debt. That means you probably cut up your credit cards. Okay, you cut up your credit cards. That's step number one. If there's a way you can reduce your debt, even if you have to sell off certain things you have in your life, even if you have to downsize. I know people who have sold their homes and moved to smaller homes. I know it's hard to do in a real estate recession right now, but wherever you can sell something off or downsize. All of us live too well. You know, in America, Americans could cut their standard of living 50% and they'd still be living high on the hog. Okay, we know how to live well, but you know, now we need to learn how to tighten our belts and tighten things down. We need to learn how to budget. And I know for some people, getting out of debt is not easy because they don't have anything they can sell. Take on no new debt. Reduce your debt where you can. Seek God's wisdom. Where you have liquid assets, yes, I do think gold and silver makes sense. All you have to do is look at the last 8 or 9 years and see why they were doing that. They will continue doing that, we think. I think you need to watch your bank. Now, I can't say in America but I can say in America there's 2,036 banks that are in trouble. The government officially says 532. Well, forget that. There's about 4 times that many. And so we tell our people, monitor your bank, monitor your financial institutions, find out what their financial condition is. And there are certain reporting services that we can use in America that we can determine that. I think that's very, very important. I believe the stock markets of the world are very, very vulnerable, and people who have a lot of money tied up in the stock markets could be in for a major fall. I know they've rallied here and in a lot of places in the last 6 to 12 months, but we don't think that's a for real deal. We think it's a bear market rally. So I would be out of most stock markets in the world. It's a time to be very, very conservative. And it's not easy in this day and age. And I wouldn't have all my funds in one currency. I wouldn't have them all in the U.S. dollar, which I think is going to be in trouble. I wouldn't have them all in the British pound either. So you diversify within currencies. I think some gold and silver makes some sense. Liquidity makes sense. Reduce your debt as much as you can. You know, they say for real estate, location. Well, in tough times, liquidity. Except don't go out and sell your gold jewelry. That's a mistake. I think that's a big mistake.
And, I mean, surely as well as Christians, one of the biggest things is to see that through all of this, whatever's happening, God is still on his throne. I mean, absolutely. None of this has taken him by surprise. I think sometimes we pick up and we see what's happening in the newspaper and think, well, God, where were you? But he was there, and he's not taken by surprise, is he?
No, he's not. And we are not captive of the mistakes of men, whether it's our financial leaders, our political leaders, or whatever. Can God protect his own? Can he look after his own people? Absolutely. Absolutely. If we are seeking him, if we are truly seeking him every day, can he look after us? Yeah. May we go through some tough times? Yes, we may. You know, I don't think tough times are all bad. Sometimes it's like getting really sick. I mean, you slough off a lot of junk, and you get it out of your body that you need to get rid of. And tough times tend to get rid of excesses. And so if we go through some tough times and some painful times, maybe that'll be good for us. And you know, I wrote a book a few years ago on the coming persecution of Christians in America. Now, boy, that was not a bestseller.
That went to the top of the charts.
Christians don't want to hear about that. But you know what? I think we could all learn a a lesson from the tough times that the Chinese church goes through. 100 million people living under hard times.
Music comes, Don. We have to go. Sorry about that. We could carry on talking tonight. Maybe we could talk later. Want the newsletter? Contact us. We'll make sure you get it. Be blessed. Trust God in all that you do. Bye for now.